We all expect our civilization to last, but historically speaking, empires come and go with great frequency. When they fall, only the ruins remain. From ancient Greek metropolises to Wild West ghost towns, today we're looking at the craziest abandoned cities. ORDOS, China, once flush with cash, has been called the world's largest ghost town. In the early 2000s, a coal mining boom led the local government to throw money at urban development in the hopes of creating a new epicenter of culture, economy, and politics. ORDOS Newtown, also known as Kongbashi, would hold 1 million people and be known for its massive abstract architecture projects, residential towers, and state-of-the-art sports venues. The story started about 20 years ago with the beginning of a great Mongolian coal rush. Private mining companies poured into the green Inner Mongolian steppelands, pockmarking the landscapes with enormous open cast holes in the ground. Local farmers sold their land to the miners and became instantly rich. Jobs burgeoned. Ceaseless coal truck convoys tore up the roads. But high property taxes and poor construction deterred people from settling in ORDOS. In 2016, some 100,000 people lived and worked there, leaving the city two-thirds empty. The whole city feels like a post-apocalyptic space station straight out of a science fiction movie, says the photographer Raphael Olivier, who captured the city in a series titled ORDOS, A Failed Utopia. HASHIMA was abandoned in 1974 and left to the elements. Storms, time, and decay have resulted in collapsed buildings that feel inhabited by the ghosts of the miners who used to live there. It's a fantastic name for an unbelievable place, a place unlike any in the world. A tiny island, once home to 5,259 people, with the highest population density in history, abruptly abandoned and left to the elements for decades. At its peak, numerous families worked and lived within the seawall that encircles the small island. The mines were closed in 1974 and the island was abandoned. It was deemed a UNESCO World Heritage Site in 2015. Bodie State Historic Park is a genuine California gold mining ghost town. Visitors can walk down the deserted streets of a town that once had a population of nearly 10,000 people. The town is named for Waterman S. Bodie, who had discovered small amounts of gold in hills north of Mono Lake. In 1875, a mine cave-in revealed pay dirt, which led to the purchase of the mine by the Standard Company in 1877. People flocked to Bodie and transformed it from a town of a few dozen to a boom town. On a daily basis, miners would emerge from the mills and head for the bars in the red light district to spend their earnings. The mixture of money, gold, and alcohol would sometimes prove fatal. From 1877 to 1882, Bodie was a bustling town with more than 10,000 residents and produced more than $35 million in gold and silver. Today, the gold mining days of California are a distinct memory, with almost 200 abandoned wooden buildings in a state of arrested decay to photograph and explore. At first glance, it looks like an idyllic settlement, with urban architecture consisting of apartment buildings made of brick or wood. But there is one thing missing: inhabitants. PYRAMIDEN was founded in Sweden in 1910 and sold to the Soviet Union in 1927. In the 1980s, the mining community had a population of more than 1,000. It is named after the pyramid-shaped mountain of the same name nearby. PYRAMIDEN is now mostly visited by seagulls, polar foxes, and not infrequently, polar bears. Tourists visit too, by boat in the summertime and by snowmobile in the wintertime, to experience this surreal place. The Russian state-owned mining company Trust Artikugol closed the mine in PYRAMIDEN on April 1, 1998, after 53 years of continuous operation. The falling price of coal, the difficulty and cost of extracting coal from the mountain, and the Russian air disaster at ROGHUDI, which claimed 141 lives, all contributed to the decision. AKARMARA, once a bustling coal mining town, is now overtaken by trees. It lies in Abkhazia, a breakaway region on Georgia's Black Sea coast. Wars and economic change have emptied the town of the 5,000 people who lived there in the 1970s. Today, with only 35 residents left, the town belongs to the forest. In the early 1990s, the siege of Kvarcheli meant that effectively AKARMARA was cut off from the rest of Abkhazia, as there is only the one main road in and out, which cuts straight through Kvarcheli. For 413 days, the town was cut off and relied on supplies being helicoptered in by Russian and separatist forces. The siege of Kvarcheli remains the biggest war trauma for a lot of Abkhazians. In the summer months, there is a steady stream of 4x4s with loud music blaring that take tourists from the coast up into the hills to see AKARMARA in the mines. On Shengshan Island, east of Shanghai, China, only a handful of people still live in a village that was once home to more than 2,000 fishermen. Every day, hundreds of tourists visit HOUTOUWAN, making their way on narrow footpaths past crumbling houses overtaken by vegetation. The remote village, on one of more than 400 islands in the Shengxi archipelago, was abandoned in the early 1990s as residents moved away, aiming to leave problems with education and food delivery behind them. In 2002, the village was officially depopulated and merged into a nearby village. After decades of abandonment, empty houses in the ocean-facing cliffside village, some of them still furnished, have been taken over by a blanket of lush climbing plants. In the dry, barren stretches on the edge of the Namib Desert in southwestern Africa lie the bones of a grand town. Among the gentle curves of the sand drifts and bleached stone outcrops, ornate buildings rise, defying their desolate surroundings and exuding an air of quiet dignity. The vastness of the lonely landscape dwarfs the buildings, and the sand seeks to hide the structures within itself. It is not until you approach the houses that their characteristic German architecture, featuring truncated roofs and generous windows, can be appreciated. In 1980, while Luderitz underwent an economic boom, the tourist potential of the ghost town was rediscovered, and some houses were dug out of the sands again and were restored, which are open for visitors. Goldfield is perched on a small hill between the Superstition Mountains and Goldfield Mountains. Gold was discovered here in 1892, and the town quickly sprang to life. The first official post office opened on October 7, 1893, and new miners flooded in. Goldfield boomed alongside the supply of gold ore for 5 years when the quality of the ore dropped. Miners moved on. The post office was discontinued on November 2, 1898, and Goldfield became a ghost town, despite the presence of some tenacious miners who stubbornly tried to find a new vein of gold. All efforts were unsuccessful until the arrival of George Young, the Secretary of Arizona and acting governor. Young brought new mining methods and equipment, and Goldfield slowly came back to life. Briefly, a new mill and cyanide plant helped retain workers, but the town became a ghost town for good in the mid-1920s. It still stands in its identical form today. On the long desert drive to Las Vegas, one of the most exciting places you can stop is the famous ghost town, owned by Knott's Berry Farm, known as CALICO Ghost Town. This unique representation of the history of California in this area is a great place to explore with the whole family. You can take a ride through an old mine on a tram, pan for silver, take pot shots in the shooting gallery, and camp overnight under the Calico Hills. In the general store on Main Street, there are fat peppermints and candy cigarettes. In the recreated print shop, a friendly skeleton wears an old-fashioned green visor, and kitschy wanted posters of madams and madmen are displayed on the walls. After surviving the Black Plague and bands of marauding thieves for more than 1,400 years, a landslide finally forced residents from CRACO in 1991. Considering the hillside village's long tenure, it's amazing the residents were not forced out earlier by Mother Nature. CRACO was founded in the 8th century and was a brilliant survivor considering the volatile nature of the medieval period. The village sits on a cliff 400 meters off of the ground. With panoramic views, the city center can easily be defended from the average barbarian horde. Despite its advantages, CRACO is at a serious natural disadvantage. Exposed to the elements along with earthquakes and landslides, CRACO finally caved in near the millennium. In a way, they are Greek ruins, but you won't find a temple to Apollo or urns painted with striding athletes in the abandoned hillside village of ROGHUDI VECCHIO. The artifacts here include a pizza oven and Coke bottles. Nonetheless, this town in Italy's Aspromonte Mountains was founded in the 11th century, and the roots of its former residents may extend to ancient times. For the past 50 years, the crumbling houses in ROGHUDI have been silent. Overharvesting of timber on some of the Aspromonte slopes has led to erosion, made worse by Calabria's annual climatic cycle. Punctuating the very dry summers are occasional hard winter rainstorms, which can cause fierce flooding. In the early 1970s, a devastating flood left ROGHUDI VECCHIO uninhabitable. Almost all the residents left the village, leaving behind a shell of a community that had endured 1,000 years. Hundreds of chateaux have been abandoned at the BURJ luxury housing development in central Turkey after its developer filed for bankruptcy, as shown in this drone footage. Approximately halfway between Turkey's largest city, Istanbul, and its capital, Ankara, the BURJ development will contain 732 identical mini chateaux if it is completed. Begun in 2014, the hundreds of houses have been left in various states of completion since the dramatic collapse of the Turkish economy led to developer Sarak Group to file for bankruptcy. The complex has debts of $27 million, reports Bloomberg. But the results are wild, with a seemingly endless sea of conical spires stretching as far as the eye can see. What does a town do when it has too much trash and nowhere to put it? In the case of Centralia, Pennsylvania, town officials decided to burn it. Started in May 1962, just before the big Memorial Day parade, the landfill blaze hit a live coal vein underground. Nearly 60 years later, a fire is still burning underneath the town. In the early 1980s, 12-year-old Centralia resident Todd Dabomsky fell into a sinkhole that appeared in his backyard. He was pulled out by his cousin, but it was discovered that the hot steam emanating from the hole contained a lethal level of carbon monoxide. In the mid-1980s, the government provided more than $42 million to buy out and relocate Centralia's remaining residents, with more than 1,000 people accepting the offer and 500 buildings being demolished. To this day, the town is hazardous to visit, and it remains abandoned. In 1905, KELSO was built specifically as a depot along the railroad line that ran between LA and Utah and cut right through the middle of the Mojave Desert. But business was so strong that KELSO ended up becoming a real town with a post office, and in the 1940s, a jail for drunkards. The original simple train depot was replaced with a much larger one in 1925 that also functioned as a boarding house for railroad employees and a restaurant. The depot officially closed in 1962 after mining dwindled, and freight trains switched from steam to diesel, although the housing and dining facilities for crew members remained open until 1985. Now, KELSO Depot has been preserved as a visitor center where you can explore historical exhibits in the former dormitory rooms, baggage room, and ticket office. Grab some spare water and a hiking guide or a map in the bookstore before heading out to KELSO Dunes or any number of the cinder cones and lava flows. The Sanchi UFO houses, also known as the Sanchi Pod houses or Sanchi Pod City, were a set of abandoned pod-shaped buildings that resembled Futuro houses, the prefabricated flying saucer-shaped house designed by Matti Suronen. The buildings were scheduled to be torn down in late 2008, despite an online petition to retain one of the structures as a museum. Demolition work on the site began on December 29, 2008, with plans to redevelop the site into a tourist attraction with hotels and beach facilities.